In his new residence, the emperor was housed alone. He had 2 small rooms, each 10 feet square. One of them would serve as his study. In each of them, a small field bed was set up. The walls of both were decorated with nankeen bordered with paper rose edging and were lit by 2 small windows known in France as the guillotine type. The view from these 2 rooms looked out upon the camp about a mile away. The window curtains were of white calico. A carpet in both rooms concealed severely rough flooring. In the room fashioned in the bedroom, there was a small fireplace made entirely of wood painted gray. A small iron grate inside indicated that coal was to be burnt in it. The fireplace was decorated with a small wooden frame with gilt columns, and a small mirror about 18 inches tall and 15 inches wide was attached above it. The 2 rooms were 9 feet high and were furnished with a few chairs and armchairs with caned backs, painted green, a dresser, a settee, and a table covered with green cloth to be used as a desk. I decorated the mantelpiece with torches taken from the emperor's travel kit, a gilt cup and its saucer, and an incense burner made of the same metal. On either side of the mirror, I hung 2 small portraits of the King of Rome. Above them hung Frederick the Great's alarm clock on one side and the Emperor's watch on the other. To the left of the fireplace, I placed the Emperor's travel kit on a small table, opened it in order to decorate the room a little more, and hung over it a 3rd portrait of the King of Rome by Isabey. On the right side of the fireplace, the emperor had his settee placed so that it protruded into the room. He then had it surrounded with a folding screen so that air would not strike him in the face when the door to his bathroom was open, as all the service had to be done through that door. Above all the settee, I hung a portrait of Empress Marie-Louise holding the King of Rome in her arms. A mahogany table was placed at the foot of the settee. A table covered with green cloth to be used as a desk was placed between the 2 windows, although it extended beyond them on the other side, and the bed was erected in a corner of the room facing the windows. These 2 rooms and the bathroom were called the emperor's private quarters. A small antechamber opening into a corridor leading to the kitchens completed the design. When the emperor left his chambers to go into the drawing room, he first entered a room a little larger than the ones he occupied. It was called the map room, as all the maps were spread out on a large table stood in the middle. The room, lit by a French window, was quite dark. The bed the admiral had sent for the emperor had been relegated to this room, which later became the dining room. One door opened into the drawing room, another into the corridor to the kitchen, and a 3rd into the emperor's bedroom. Beyond that was a large room lit by 2 windows. It had a small study with an exit into the kitchen corridor, allowing it to be entered without disturbing the emperor in his quarters, though it really was a part of it. The emperor had at once designated it as a lodging for the Grand Marshal, whom he wanted to have close by, but Count Bertrand pointed out that he, his wife, and his 3 children would be very overcrowded in this one room, and since the admiral had no objection to his living in the small cottage at Hut's Gate until his own lodging was completed, he asked permission to settle there with his family. "Do whatever you wish," replied the emperor. "Montholon will lodge with me." As the emperor wanted to know how each of the people with him were getting settled in at Longwood, he left his room after dressing and went straight to the lodgings of Madame de Montholon, separated from his own only by the room I mentioned. He knocked lightly, and the countess opened, sliding aside a bolt that locked this door. She and the general expressed their embarrassment at being surprised in the disarray of moving in. "Sire," said the countess, "it is both my drawing room and my bedroom." The emperor thanked them both for being satisfied with so little in order to lodge with him. He urged General Montholon to push the work being done on their apartment in order for them to move in there as soon as possible. The emperor left and told Count Las Casas to take him to his temporary lodgings. It was a room close to the kitchen. The admiral had it arranged as best he could, but it was still in such a state that the emperor said, "My dear friend, you shall sleep in the map room. There is already a bed, and you are not sufficiently comfortable here." Count Las Casas thanked the emperor, but out of discretion never took advantage of this. He then went to General Gourgaud's tent, erected in front of the house under his windows. Believing that in a climate where the temperature changes so suddenly after sunset, the roof on his tent was too light, he advised him to have a bed set up every evening in the parlor. The general could keep his tent to retire during the day. The general thanked him for his offer and said that in this manner he could very well wait for the work to be completed on his lodging. Dr. O'Meara and the British officer commanding at Longwood were also housed in tents. The emperor was touched by the devotion of one and all who preferred a poor lodging near him to a comfortable apartment in town. The emperor returned to the drawing room, going through the parlor that was preceded by a small veranda. These two rooms stuck out from the main building, as can be seen on the map. The drawing room was lit by two windows of the same type as those in the bedroom. The view looked out over the guard building located at the entrance of Longwood and further out on Diana's Peak. The road between Hut's Gate and Alarm House closed off the horizon on that side with his spyglass. The emperor was able to recognize those people who went or from town. This drawing room, 14 feet in length and 12 in width, was decorated with marble fireplace with a large mirror above it, some chairs, armchairs, and a settee. A rug covered the floor, and white curtains with colored draperies hung at the windows. A piano was brought several days later to help distract Countess de Montsalon, whose amateur talent was quite remarkable. The wooden parlor that the admiral had built was much larger. It was lit by 5 windows. Those on the left, when leaving the drawing room, had the same view as the latter. Those on the opposite side were located on either side of the fireplace and opened on a gum tree grove, located about a shotgun distance away, above which the ocean could be seen. This room, with a double door at one end facing the drawing room door, was the main entrance to the chambers and the waiting room for foreigners who solicited the honor of being received by the emperor. The veranda, raised 3 steps above ground level, ran the entire width of the building. It was of trellis work, painted green, shaped like a portico, 6 feet width and 16 feet long. From there, the view extended to a shallow valley where Count Bertrand's house was being constructed, not far from the farm and garden of the East India Company that made up the backdrop. It was dominated on one side by the camp and on another by Goat's Rock. The East India Company garden consisted of very little. The gardener lodging and the stable for the oxen were called a farm. At home, this would have been the poor lodging of a peasant. The grass we walked on around the Longwood building was like that of the camp, damaged by the wind and sun. Although the dew was quite abundant at night, it was not enough to refresh it. In sum, this place was sad, and the wind that prevailed constantly made it quite unbearable. But the plateau was completely dominated by the surrounding hillsides and could be easily watched. And this particular situation had determined its choice. The large parlor, 24 feet by 16 feet, would have been the most practical room for the emperor. When the weather was bad, he could have strolled there. But the fireplace was poor, and it was impossible to make a fire in it. On the other hand, when the weather was good, the sun beat down on the roof with full tropical force, and the heat in that room was unbearable. In the attic in the old building, they had made small cells for servants. These rooms were lit by skylights. My own, located just above the emperor's bedroom, was paneled on both sides. At the peak, they cut a window decorated with shutters. The view extended over the most pleasant part of the plateau, encompassing the camp and the road from Alarm House to Longwood, Diana's Peak, and the prettiest part of the valley, where Miss Mason's house and the Balcombe Lodge were located. As I have already said, the Grand Marshal was lodged at Hut's Gate, approximately 2 miles from Longwood. That same evening at dinner time began the family life that everyone so desired. The day after his arrival, the emperor wished to look over the Longwood enclosure. He was accompanied by General Gourgaud and Countess Cassis, who spoke English very well. He was of great help to him for engaging people he might meet in conversations, should he take a fancy to question them during their stroll. Poorly interpreted orders stopped the emperor during his walk. The area to the left of him was not so large that he had to believe he would be free to move around without being stopped. He came home quite disgusted and complained justifiably about the hindrances to his outings. When Colonel Bingham was informed of this misunderstanding, he came at once to apologize for the error committed by the sentry. The admiral also came during the afternoon and listened to the emperor's comments on the uselessness of so many outposts that every instant confronted him with a bayonet. He assured him that nothing of the kind would happen again and that he was taking great care to make his stay at St. Helena as bearable as possible. Since our arrival on the island, nothing had yet been organized. Once at Longwood, the emperor wanted his household staff to be organized. He assigned certain tasks to each one to avoid friction that would have arisen otherwise, aptly saying that where everyone gives orders, there is nothing but disorder. Although the Grand Marshal did not give up his title, it was Count de Montholon who fulfilled his duties. Cipriani, the butler under his orders, arranged with him for the distribution of food. But at Longwood and at Count Bertrand's at Hutsgate, Mr. Balcombe became the supplier, and the government allocations appeared reasonable. Sometimes there was reason to complain about the quality, but generally it was due more to a lack of resources than the admiral's fault, and when he was informed of this, he would immediately remedy it as much as he could, always expressing his regrets for a state of affairs that he tried to improve. The stable consisted of 10 horses, 4 draft horses, and 6 saddle horses. A carriage purchased at the Cape of Good Hope by the admiral was there for the emperor's use. It was only one on the island. Sailors taken from the crew of the Northumberland were dressed and assigned to the stable under the orders of the Archambault brothers. The elder of the 2 brothers had been head footman on the island of Elba, but both of them came from the stables and had already driven the emperor in a carriage. It was therefore easy for them to organize that service. They drove the emperor until the men under their orders were able to do so and took care of training the saddle horses used by the emperor. General Gourgaud was in charge of supervising the stable staff. Besides the 6 sailors in the stables, 6 others were assigned to different services. The silver, under Rousseau's orders, had 2 of them. The kitchen had 3, and the pantry 1. The emperor did not want any in his private apartments, but on my suggestion, he agreed that I take a Chinese as a wardrobe boy. My attendance on the emperor was continuous, even at night. Saint-Denis and Noveraz each had one day on duty, which consisted of staying in a small room preceding the bathroom, used as an entrance to the emperor's private apartments, and sleeping there at night in front of the emperor's door, as I did myself. In addition, Saint-Denis continued to recopy the emperor's dictations to prepare his manuscripts. Santini was assigned to the map room as usher, opening the drawing room door when the emperor came out of his bedroom, and acting as liaison with the outside staff. Gentilini became the footman and was in charge of setting the table. Each of them wore the uniform matching his assignment. When this attire became too frayed, it was not replaced, and only the outer coat continued to be worn. Table service was handled with the silverware and the porcelain brought from Paris. In addition to what I had with me in leather boxes, a magnificent dessert service from Sèvres, representing the various battlefields of Egypt and Europe, beautiful vases, and a collection of 24 cups from the same manufacturer completed this beautiful set, which the emperor did not want to use for fear they would break. The emperor's table was served by his butler, the pantry head who would offer him dessert himself. Saint-Denis and Noveraz were placed on the right and left of the emperor and served only him. Santillini, Gentilini, and the several footmen served those who had been honored with an invitation to dinner. If the emperor dined in his private quarters, the butler would carry the dinner as far as the bathroom. The valet on duty would bring it in, and with his help, I had the honor of serving it myself. Count Las Casas was assigned the job of taking inventory of the furniture, but it was of so little importance that he did not even bother. The emperor started working at Longwood, as he had at the Briars. Specific times were assigned to each of these gentlemen. The Grand Marshal had his, and every day a horse was taken to Hut's Gate so that he could come to Longwood, where he and Countess Bertrand dined only on Sundays. Lunch was served first at 11 a.m. and dinner at 7 p.m. Because he was obliged to dress to be present at lunch, the emperor decided to lunch in his bedroom, and so extended the morning in his robe until 2 p.m. He then went into the drawing room, and if weather permitted, he would call for the carriage to go on a tour of the Longwood Plateau or to Hut's Gate to see the marshal's wife. During these trips, he was accompanied by Countess de Montholon, Count Las Casas, and by General Gourgaud, who went on horseback. Dinner was at 7 p.m. The emperor had gotten to a habit of ending his evenings in the dining room with some reading. All the staff would leave. He would then have Saint-Denis, who was in charge of the library, bring him either Corneille, Racine, or Molière. And depending on the work selected, he would say, "Will we hear Talma or Fleury?" At 10 p.m., he went back to his own apartment Taking with him Count Las Casas, he would undress, chat with him, and dismiss him when sleep began to overtake him. If one adds to the preceding description a few horseback rides with General Gourgaud, the presentation of a few people from town, passengers coming from China or India, and returning to Europe, a few dinner invitations extended to the Admiral, Colonel Bingham, and some officers of his regiment, one will have a relatively accurate picture of the monotonous existence led by the Emperor in St. Helena. Fortunately, intellectual resources were not lacking, thanks to his extraordinary mind and the diverse aptitudes of those surrounding him. He was entertained by conversations that rendered more bearable the awful rock where the hatred of kings kept him detained. When all the construction was completed, everyone settled in his own corner, as if he were to remain there until the end of his life, and embellished as best he could his modest lodgings. I had the carpenter from the Northumberland build 2 closets in my bedroom in order to put the emperor's clothing there. I pasted them on either side of the window and had paper brought in from town. I was sent a Chinese paper with a blue background decorated with roses and gilt highlights. There was no other, and I had it pasted on the walls. I had oilcloth representing a parquet put down to hide the poor condition of the floor, and a white bedspread made to cover my bed, although I did not sleep there. On a simple little settee that was there, I threw a percale sheet that gave it an enviable air of cleanliness. A small washstand and 2 chairs completed my furniture, which my Chinese man took good care of, so that when I went there to wash, I spent the time there with pleasure. My shutters remained closed for coolness, but the sun poured down with such strength on the slates, only separating from me by lathing, that during the day this bedroom was uninhabitable. The circumference allowed by the emperor in his strolls around the house, without his being followed by the duty officer, could have been 6 or 8 miles, but in truth there was only the Longwood Grove, the garden belonging to the East India Company, and Deadwood, the location of the camp, which he never visited, where he could stroll, and this area was certainly not much more than 4 miles. The rest consisted of ravines that he would cover on horseback with great care so that his horse would not fall. One day, when he was strolling on foot through one of these valleys, accompanied by the Count Las Casas and General Gourgaud, the emperor almost disappeared in some sort of bog. When he came home, he told these gentlemen who accompanied him to his bedroom, it was the Marsh of Arcole. What would they have said in Europe, he added, laughing, had I disappeared in it? That it was a just punishment for my crimes? As his boots were muddied all the way to the top, I asked Saint-Denis the reason for this. He told me that the emperor, having climbed down from his horse to proceed on foot in a valley he did not know, had been mistaken about the nature of the terrain that appeared to be covered by fresh grass, but in reality had no consistency whatsoever. In that same area, sometime later, Saint-Denis, on horseback, found himself stuck in the mud and was only able to get out with great difficulty, assisted by General Gourgaud. The emperor stopped his stroll and only resumed it when General Gourgaud came to tell him that Saint-Denis had been able to get out. In this valley stood the small house belonging to Miss Robinson. This lady has 2 daughters. The older was 15 or 16, and both of them had gotten into the habit, when the emperor passed their house, of approaching and offering him some flowers. Without being pretty, they were pleasant, but there was little financial ease under that roof. The emperor would greet them with kindness and was in the habit of calling the older one the Las Casas nymph, and the valley of silence. The 2 young ladies thus acquired a certain amount of fame that soon reached the town. This fame caused a naval captain from the East India Company to seek out the older daughter for his wife when he came through St. Helena, and he married her. Before leaving the island, the young couple came to see the emperor, who congratulated the husband on his choice and wished for the young woman to become the mother of a fine, numerous family. The emperor had gotten into the habit of taking this stroll because in that way he went up to Hut's Gate, where the Grand Marshal lived. He would stop there, then come back to Longwood, having covered the entire area that was reserved for him, as he was not allowed to go any further without being accompanied by the duty officer. The emperor could not accept that sent 2,000 leagues away from Europe, on a rock 600 leagues from both the continents of Africa and America. He would not be allowed to roam this entire island, which was so narrow and unhealthy as a prison and impossible to be entered without authorization from the Admiral or Sir George Bingham. The outpost beyond which he was not allowed to go was 600 paces from the house and had orders to present arms to the emperor. Apart from these precautions, all the peaks that dominated Longwood were occupied by men who communicated between themselves by signals and watched the emperor during his strolls. At 9 p.m., sentries 50 paces apart took up position around the house in such a way it was impossible to get out. These patrols crisscrossed in various directions, and this state of affairs lasted until the day the duty officer was given a special assignment to do whatever it needed to catch sight of the emperor twice every 24 hours. To these precautions must be added those taken at sea. From Diana's Peak and Alarm House, vessels could be seen 12 leagues out to the sea before they could approach. Signals were sent to the 2 ships that constantly cruised around the island. If the ships spotted were not British, they were accompanied into the harbor by a cruiser, and the ship could not drop anchor until it had gotten permission and received on board a detachment commanded by an officer to keep an eye on its crew. Such were the precautions taken to assure the detention. They were soon to be augmented by those invented by the suspicious mind of the new governor, who was expected. It can be imagined how unbearable these restrictions appeared to the emperor and how they generated complaints on his part. Instructions given on so many different points were often poorly understood. It was impossible to arrest the emperor during his strolls, and this would have happened had General Gourgaud not restrained a drunken sergeant who wanted to prevent the emperor from passing. Deeply resenting these injustices, the emperor dictated to Count de Montholon a series of complaints addressed to Admiral Cockburn. The letter was quite strongly worded, and from that, the admiral was no less so, and the coolness that existed between them in their context increased all the more. The admiral claimed all the measures taken were based on his instructions. But, the emperor said, there is an immense difference between the instructions and their execution. The person who gave these orders in London would oppose them had he to execute them here. They are totally absurd. An argument after which one could have thought the admiral would temper his harshness regarding these limitations took place between him and the emperor, who soon relinquished his illusions. Wanting to go on horseback to Sandy Bay, he gave up the idea when he was told that the duty officer proposed to accompany him. He did not find in this conduct the frankness which he attributed to the admiral's character, and refused to receive him during several visits he came to pay him, claiming he was ill when he was not. This desire to go to Sandy Bay had come about because General Gourgaud, accompanied by an officer, had visited that part of the island and gone as far as Plantation House. The contrast that existed between that site, covered with lovely vegetation, and the aridity of Longwood underscored even further the cruelty of having the emperor lodged on this plateau. "It is infamy," said the emperor. "It is barbaric savagery to have placed me under these tar paper roofs when they could have lodged me a few thousand feet from here in a house where I would have found shade and water." Some petty rivalries, which time only increased, came about because of a little more closeness was granted to Countess Cassis, whose age was nearest that of the emperor. They were an obstacle to the good relations so necessary that lead to trust and often bring charm in the midst of the greatest misfortunes. But among all these gentlemen, the Count was the only one who spoke English well and could translate the newspapers when they arrived. The emperor was taking lessons in that language, and for Countess Cassis, it was an opportunity to spend one more hour with him. Then, too, let it be said that the emperor was a man of habit, and although his fondness for the others was in no way diminished, the habits acquired at the Briars continued at Longwood. If he did not really suffer from this, the emperor saw with regret that the voyage and the stay in the island had not generated the friendship so desirable in captivity among the gentlemen of his retinue. When the emperor organized the household staff, he decided that there would be 2 tables for meals, my own and a pantry table for the servants of the emperor's retinue. Some complaints followed, but nothing came of them because I had a similar table on the island of Elba and in Paris during the 100 days, and there was no reason to complain about what the emperor had decided. What had caused this small dissatisfaction was that, with the exception of a few of these faithful servants, the emperor had decided the butler would dine with me, and the other servants would dine in the pantry, where a single table brought together the servants of the officers surrounding the emperor. The food supply did not permit any other arrangement.